Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Elliott. We do not have Dr. Yana with us this evening, but that's all right. We have a very special guest tonight. We have Dr. Bethany Butzer. I will properly introduce her here in 1 second. But right now, you are listening to Science and the Paranormal. We are broadcasting on the United Public Radio Network, the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 FM out of New Orleans, and also on Roku TV. Dr. Bethany Butzer is a Canadian that works abroad, and I had come across her work online somehow. Maybe it was synchronicity, maybe it was coincidence, but I had seen something she'd written about synchronicity and really caught my attention. But she has been interested and self-conscious and inquisitive since a child. She spent 10 years in university. She earned her master's in clinical psychology and a PhD in social psychology. And she's also written a book about her experiences with antidepressants. She also teaches at the University of New York in Prague, overseas, which I thought was really interesting because Bethany has ties to Canada, which I am located in Nova Scotia, Canada. So it was it was really fascinating. There was a lot of synchronicities there, I guess. Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Elliot. Good to be here.
So, besides just being kind of self-conscious and inquisitive as a child growing up, how did you get into the paranormal field? I guess I know you do other stuff other than the paranormal, but how did you get into synchronicity and being fascinated with parapsychology?
Well, I guess I would say that even from a young age, I experienced, I guess, what you could consider to be psi phenomenon. I would have these intuitive nudges that would end up coming to pass sometimes, or dreams, precognitive dreams, dreams that would come true. And I always had an interest in why is that happening? I mean, from even beyond that, I just always had an interest in how the universe works. What is the universe? Why are we here? I was asking those types of questions even as a very young child. And so I had some of these types of experiences myself. And in adulthood, these experiences continued, synchronicities and various psi phenomena. And I was studying psychology professionally, doing my master's and PhD, as you mentioned, at very mainstream universities. And those universities were not interested in parapsychology or transpersonal psychology or synchronicity. And so I had to sort of keep that side of myself hidden in some ways. And I felt in a way like my professional life was gaslighting my personal life because I was experiencing these phenomena that felt very, very real to me. But professionally, my scientific colleagues were saying, well, this is rubbish. And so I was secretly interested in these aspects. And it was only in the last maybe 5 to 7 years that I more professionally have been able to start doing research on synchronicity, mostly through my ties with, as you mentioned, the University of New York in Prague, which was more open to some of my ideas, and also the Alef Trust, which is another university that I'm affiliated with, that is a university that focuses specifically on transpersonal psychology and is much more open to these types of ideas.
That's really fascinating. I wonder if New York University was more open to it because I know Dr. Sam Perina, that studies near-death experiences, is associated to New York University. I wonder if, it's just a more liberal university compared to some of the others. You're
Mm.
not the only academic that kind of investigates parapsychology from the corner of their desk. There's not much funding for research in parapsychology, so a lot of academics have to do their paranormal study kind of under a different guise. But it's always interesting once they get the funding and they do their study and they release their peer-reviewed article, of course.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons I think that the University of New York in Prague was more open is that they're a satellite school, really. They're much smaller. So it was a much smaller university, and they were open to, they just wanted professors to do research. They were open to whatever that research might be. And so Really, it's actually the only empirical peer-reviewed study that I've done that relates to parapsychology. And it wasn't actually even a study of psi, but I did this study while I was at the University of New York in Prague, and I was looking at bias against parapsychology because that's something that really interests me. As you've mentioned, there's lack of funding, there's all sorts of ways that people who study psi phenomenon end up at a disadvantage in many ways. And so I published a study on that while I was at the University of New York in Prague.
That's really interesting, and certainly glad that you've contributed to the field of parapsychology. Do you find that they're a little bit more open about parapsychology over in Europe compared to North America?
I do get a sense here, and of course I don't know for sure because I live in Prague very much as an expat. I'm surrounded by English speaking people. I was teaching, UNIP is the short form for the University of New York in Prague. So when I was teaching at UNIP, I was surrounded by English speaking colleagues. I teach for the Alef Trust now, which is a university in the UK. So, I'm very much an expat. But I just get this sense through some of my affiliations with, for example, Charles University in Prague and other European colleagues that there is a little more openness. Psychedelic research, for example, in many ways originated in Prague, in Czechoslovakia at the time, in the 1960s with a transpersonal psychology professor, Stanislav Graf. And there's always been this underground here that has continued to be interested in psychedelics, in alchemy, for example. You can find there's an alchemy museum here. So you can find some of these more esoteric types of topics being more covered. The history, a lot of the medieval history around that has been kept alive here, I think, more so than in perhaps North America.
That's amazing. I've never been overseas. It's definitely on my list. I've only been around North America, and I guess Hawaii was off of North America's continent, but yeah, I'll have to get over there for sure. Um, I know it's rich with history. That's why it's great. Nova Scotia is a great place to be a paranormal investigator because we're so rich with folklore because of our Scottish and our English, ties and settlements. So yeah, it's a great spot to investigate the paranormal here for sure. Now, synchronicity. I've I'm not certainly not an expert in it at all. It does come up in the paranormal quite a bit. It was a concept that was developed by psychologist Carl Jung, and basically, it's meaningful coincidences that occur with no casual relationship, yet they seem to be meaningfully related. Um, how did you come to start studying synchronicity? What drew you in, and what have you learned in all your research about synchronicity?
Hmm. Well, I guess one really, in some ways it's minor, but some ways not. When you read causal, you spelled it casual, or you pronounced it casual, which is interesting, but it's causal. So they appear to have no causal relationship. And I think it's actually an important part of the definition because when we think of causality in our typical ways, it's like A causes B, in physics, I don't know, this causes this, the end. Whereas synchronicities are when two events are linked in some way that doesn't follow our normal mainstream definitions of causality. So A happens and then B happens, but you can't figure out where the link is in terms of how one caused the other. I might give just a brief example here of a synchronicity of my own, just to kind of,
Absolutely.
yeah, bring it to life a bit. It's one that I share often, but maybe some of your listeners haven't heard me talk about it before. It's a quick one. It's a precognitive dream that I had. And so this is also going to help tease apart a couple of things about synchronicity and the paranormal. So I had this dream. I was attending a retreat, a personal development retreat, and I had a dream that a Rottweiler dog came behind me out of nowhere and attacked me and bit my arm. And I was crying and I was upset, and no one came to help me. And I wrote about this dream in my journal, and then I completely forgot about the dream, absolutely forgot about it. And then a few months later, my mom was out for a walk, and a Rottweiler dog came out of nowhere and attacked her and bit her on the arm. And the owner didn't help her, and she walked home holding her arm, and her arm was bleeding and she was crying, and no one stopped to help her. And, she eventually got to the hospital, and she had to get stitches, and it was a pretty serious wound. And she ended up winning a lawsuit against the dog's owner in the end. Um,
Wow.
yeah, but this is an example of a synchronicity in the sense that there was an internal mental event, so the dream, which which was followed by the external event that happened to my mom. And we have no mainstream explanations of causality for the link between those two events. And so that's how Jung would define a synchronicity, that there's this mental event that's followed by an external physical event. And in parapsychology, we talk about precognition, like a precognitive dream, as an aspect of psi phenomena. So they are interlinked. There's links between them. Some have argued that they're not identical. One of the reasons being that parapsychological phenomena can be elicited and in experimental settings and studied in that way, whereas synchronicity is very challenging to do that. And so this gets me around in a long way to answering your question, which is I became interested in researching synchronicity because of these personal experiences and because it's something that really hasn't been studied much empirically, like in the research, peer-reviewed research literature. And to me, that's an interesting challenge. Synchronicity poses this very interesting challenge that it's hard to design a classic type of randomized controlled trial to study synchronicity. And I think that it's actually the most difficult topics to study that are the ones most worth studying. And so it's one of the reasons I'm interested in it as a research topic as well.
Yeah, skeptics always criticize, our parapsychological studies and phenomena because they often happen very spontaneously. They don't happen necessarily in the laboratory. A lot of things happen out in the field in an uncontrolled environment. And for some reason, skeptics and the naysayers are really against that. But for me, I mean, that's just I've been investigating and researching the paranormal for 27 years. To me, that is just a normal part of that field of study. So that doesn't really surprise me. The precognitive dream that you had and then it actually happening to your mother, I also find interesting as well, because one thing that I've noticed a pattern of is it seems that paranormal phenomena can happen a lot between people that are really closely related, whether it's a close relative, family friend, like a best friend. We've seen that in call cases of the living where people are appearing as apparitions before somebody, but they're still alive. We've seen it even in post-mortem apparition shortly after death. Um, it's very interesting that you had that connection with your mom, and then it actually played out. I've been in that situation, not as bad as your mom, but when I was policing once, there was a guy that had broken his leg on a dirt bike, and I was in plain clothes, and I was the closest unit to him. So I had got to the scene, and I remember I was talking to him, trying to assess the situation, and this lady walked by with a big dog. It wasn't a Rottweiler; it was more like almost like a German Shepherd type dog. And all of a sudden, I could feel a pain in my left hand, and I looked down, and this dog was like chewing on my hand. And of course, I made the mistake of pulling my hand back once I realized what was happening, and of course, the teeth caused some damage to my fingers. And I remember I could hear the sirens coming in the background, and the lady again wasn't stopping, just kind of kept walking. And I yelled at her like to get her name and all that stuff to check with Bylaw about her dog later. And eventually, I had to leave the guy and go to the hospital myself to get shots and get checked out. They always taught us officer safety first, because if something happens to us, we can't help anybody else, kind of thing. And I remember the guy yelling, he's like, "You're not going to leave me here, are you?" And I said, "The guys they're coming, they're right here." I said, "I'm going to have to go to the hospital though." So I think he was just happy to see somebody come and help him. But yeah, it's I can relate to your mom's incident there. It wasn't fun, and
Mm.
especially like if somebody my dog bit somebody, I think I'd be quite upset about it and do everything you can to help them, not pretend that it didn't happen.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Do you find with your precognitive experiences, have you had them while you've been awake, or have they mostly come to you in the forms of dreams?
I would say that most of mine have been in the form of dreams, although sometimes I've had strong, I guess you could say, yeah, intuitive nudges or body-based feelings, sensations that happen. And as you were saying a moment ago, I agree with you that these often happen in relation to people that we're close to, whether close friends or family members. And and that happens with synchronicity as well. At least some the research that's been done on it seems to suggest something similar, that synchronicities often happen in relation to people we're close to or during emotionally charged events like births and deaths and weddings and etc. Um, yeah, I've sometimes joked that I think that I'm some sort of birth and death antenna because I've predicted just through dreams some of my friends' pregnancies, like very unexpected pregnancies. They all have a dream that a friend is pregnant, and then she'll say like, "Oh, I wasn't expecting to have a baby, but I am." Or when it comes to deaths, I'll often get it's either deaths or when someone I love or I'm close to becomes seriously ill or something really bad happens to them. I will have a really bad, like I'll wake up that morning and just be so nauseated for absolutely no reason, and I can't figure it out. And then a few hours later, I find out that something bad has happened to someone that I care about. And so I guess I'd say I've had them both while awake and asleep, but the dreams I think are usually more common for me.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah. Another phenomena that I just thought about too that happens with people that are close by is they've done a lot of telepathy, telephone studies, where they'll even have a computer just randomly have somebody that's close to you phone you, and people have shown above chance that they're able to predict who's actually phoning them, which is really interesting. It's certainly there's some sort of connection there, obviously, with the closeness and the relationship. And you certainly, I would say, have that intuitive ability with the precognition. I had an experience once. I've shared it before on the other podcasts that I've done. It happened while I was awake. So I had woken up that morning, and I had dated this crazy girl that actually worked for the police force too at the time, and she was a civilian member. And I woke up that morning and I had this like really negative feeling that something bad was going to happen. I had the feeling that it was work related. And I actually saw like a flash of her face, like in my mind's eye. And I had felt like she had made some sort of complaint against me at work. And about 20 minutes later, my cell phone rang, and it was the serious incident response team, which here in Nova Scotia is an external body that investigates police wrongdoing. And so I got a call from them, and they asked how am I doing, and I said, well, not very good. I said, because CERT doesn't call you to tell you you're doing a good job. And they kind of chuckled, and they said, listen, don't want you to panic, but there was a complaint made against you. We investigated it. We found out that there was no wrongdoing, and we just want to swing by your house, talk to you about who made the complaint against you. We feel you have a right to know, and I said, sure, come by the house. But I already knew. I was like, I know where this came from. And sure enough, they came by and they confirmed it. And this was like months after we had broken up. We hadn't spoken in months. Wasn't thinking about her. Had no idea that like she would, make a complaint that far in advance. I was seeing other people at the time, and it was really profound because when people talk about having their precognitive experiences, whether it's in a dream or like you said, in the morning, you just have that like sick feeling in your stomach. Unless you experience it, I don't think you really understand it, because it is like a very powerful feeling. And it was kind of the only time that I had like a really big, I think, precognitive incident. Now, with policing, I would listen to my intuition all the time, but when I would come home, I wouldn't listen to my intuition. And it could be stupid things like, you might not want to take this route because there's going to be a car accident and you're going to be late and things like that. And I would never listen to it off duty. And sure enough, bad things would always happen. So finally, a couple years ago, I said, I listen to it while I'm working. I need to listen to it in my personal life. So I started to actually follow that intuition, and things have gone a lot more smoother. Whether it's you take a different route, or if my daughter's playing around my desk and I see something moving towards the edge, I'll intervene rather than just let it play out, and things have gone a lot smoother. So I'm certainly a believer in your intuition. I do think it's important, and I often talk about, um, in today's society, we're so busy with our cell phones, and it's so noisy, and we're so busy focusing on our problems and working, that I think a lot of our abilities to receive our intuition are plagued in today's modern society.
Oh yeah. No, I would absolutely agree with you. And I think that, you raise an interesting point about how our intuition is potentially linked to both psi and synchronicity and how we can use it, because so for example, one of my colleagues, Bernie Beitman, he's written a couple of books on synchronicity. He's a medical doctor, but who's studied synchronicity as well. And he's a big advocate for the idea of using synchronicity, including our intuition, psi, all of these factors, in practical ways in our lives in order to benefit our lives. Because the idea, if you choose to subscribe to it, is that when we have these nudges or when we experience a synchronicity, it's a way that the universe, for lack of a better word, is communicating with us. So there's information being communicated with us that if we pay attention to and we follow, then we can be guided towards things that might be beneficial. Now, and of course, this works all fine and good, and it works for me. Kind of like you, I've actually gotten better at paying attention to my intuition. So now when I wake up with one of those feelings, I'm like, oh no, I think something might be going on, and I get in touch with people and I see if everyone's okay, and sometimes everyone is okay. So it's not like 100% perfect antenna, as I said a moment ago. But I think that we can use these intuitions and use synchronicities as guides and examples to help us. But of course, there are also negative synchronicities that happen. Or even if you think about my dream that I had about the dog, that dream didn't actually protect my mom. I had forgotten that I had it. My mom got bitten by the dog, and I still forgot the dream. It wasn't until a couple months later I was looking at one of my old journals, and I was like, oh yeah. And I looked at the date and I figured out, that was before my mom was bit by the dog. But that dream didn't really help with that at all. And so I think that sometimes these psi phenomena and synchronicities happen to us for mysterious reasons that we we might not fully understand. And sometimes the meaning of a synchronicity might not even become apparent until months or years later. If nothing else, at the bare minimum, sometimes I think synchronicities happen, even what you might think of as a negative synchronicity, they happen just as little hints, as ways for this information layer that's underneath our reality to kind of poke through and let us know that it exists, so that we can just continue to hone and develop these intuitive skills and use them in practical ways.
Yeah, I agree with that, and like you said, sometimes whether or not that dream would have played out, or if you had warned your mom, it happened a couple months later. So, she may have forgotten about it as well. You could have said, hey, if you see a Rottweiler, like, be cautious around there. It's really hard to say what would happen, and if things would still play out the way that they have. My mom is very sensitive, and it freaks her out. So she tries to shut it down. It happens a lot to her in dreams as well. And I do remember a couple of incidents that happened that proved to be true. So one was when I was a kid. We used to live in these kind of row housings, and there was a parking lot in between the set of row houses. And so my brother and I were going to go outside to play. And my mom said to me as we were going out, she said, "Watch your brother. Don't let him play out in the parking lot." And I said, "Yeah, yeah, okay." And I'm like running out the door, and she grabbed me by the back of my shirt and she pulled me back in. She said, "No, I'm serious." She said, "I had a dream last night that there was a car that came flying through the parking lot and hit your brother. And I said, okay. I said, I'll keep an eye on him. So we went outside and we were playing. And sure enough, I think it was like that classic thing you see on TV where the ball rolls into the middle of the parking lot kind of thing. And he went to run out and grab it. And sure enough, I had looked to my right and there was a car coming speeding in the parking lot. And I grabbed his back of his collar and pulled him back. And the car didn't slow down or stop. It went straight through the parking lot. So um, I remember I ran into the house and told mom what had happened. And another time, she talked about this with a friend of mine that had a television show called Shadow Hunter. When they talked about psychic experiences, she had a dream that my dad was at work and she was peeling potatoes, and a gentleman had come to the door. He was wearing a red coat, red ball cap, and he wanted to use the phone. And she let him in the house in the dream, and he had tried to murder her. So the next day, she actually was peeling potatoes, and there was a knock at the door. And when she looked out the door, she actually did see a man in a red coat and a red hat, and he asked to use the phone. So what she did is, instead of letting him into the house like she did in the dream, this is back in the day where you had those big clunky portable phones. He said that he needed to use the phone. His car broke down. So she had just opened the door just a little bit, passed him the portable phone. She heard him make a phone call, and then he gave the phone back and left. But just like strange, incidents like that happened, within 24-hour time period. Um,
Wow.
Absolutely
Wow.
fascinating. When you look at those experiences, how does one study synchronistic events? Is it a lot based on almost like me investigating apparitions? It's people's lived experiences. Is that
Mm.
the majority way, or is there a way that we can kind of look at synchronicity in a laboratory?
Yes, well, yes and no. But first, I'll just very briefly mention, based on what you were saying a moment ago, it just made me think of some research done by the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS. They're just doing this research right now, but about genetic propensities for psi. Because you were talking about your mom and how you've had these types, and my mom actually has had these types of phenomena happen with her as well, and so do I, and one of my grandmothers. And so
We've got
they are
strong,
studying.
strong side genes then.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and so there are researchers out there who are looking to see if there are genetic markers for psi abilities, the same way there would be for other traits that we might have. So I just thought I'd throw that in there for people who might be interested. But um, so in terms of studying synchronicity, it's tricky. So it's like you said, most of the research that's been done so far has been questionnaire-based type of data that's just simply asking people about their synchronistic experiences, what has happened to them. So some of it's more qualitative types of research where people are interviewed and you get these rich stories and quotes from people. And then some of it's questionnaire-based where people are just sort of ticking off scales and they get, a score on a questionnaire that gives their frequency of experiencing synchronicities, for example. There's been much less experimental type of data where you have people in a lab and you maybe have an experimental group and a control group, and the experimental group gets some kind of intervention around synchronicity. That's the kind of research that I would really like to see more of that doesn't exist very much, if at all. So because synchronicity is so nuanced, it's like psi in a way. It happens very spontaneously and naturally in the environment. And some have argued that trying to force it into a box in a lab actually dampers it and keeps it from happening. And the effects are so subtle anyway that you often need a large number of participants, same with psi research, or participants who are perhaps particularly gifted at recognizing synchronicities or experiencing them the same way with psi research as well. But I would like to perhaps do a study someday where I have a colleague who developed you could call it a protocol called personal synchronistic inquiry. And it's basically almost like a meditation technique where you invoke synchronicity, you ask synchronicity to happen, and then you sit for a few minutes and you just see what comes through. You write that down, and then you pay attention over a set period of time whether those those things that came to you are happening in your life. Of course, that has its limitations. It has all sorts of flaws, but I've thought about doing some sort of a study where in one group, individuals are taken through this type of meditation, this synchronistic inquiry. In another group, they're taken through just a regular type of meditation. And you would actually take, so I'm just going to use an example. Let's say I'm a participant in this study and a rainbow comes to mind during this meditation. And so then I spend the next 2 weeks noticing if rainbows happen to appear. Now, of course, that has limitations because if I'm paying attention to rainbows now, I'm probably going to see more rainbows around. So what the control group would do is you would also use some of those words like rainbow with the control group and ask them, have you experienced more rainbows over the last 2 weeks? And what you would expect is that in the synchronicity meditation group, because they went through this meaningful meditation and that perhaps rainbow is personally meaningful to this person, that they might be more likely to experience rainbows. Now, this still doesn't, there's still lots of limitations, and it still doesn't prove really that synchronicity is behind it. It could just be the person group or the other. So it's very tricky, but I'm confident that similar to parapsychology research, that over decades and decades, people will start to come up with various technologies, various protocols, various ways to do these types of studies that could perhaps suggest more about synchronicity. Because even Jung himself collaborated with physicist Wolfgang Pauli, because Jung believed that synchronicity had a basis in physics, specifically within quantum physics in some way. And so, I think there's some merit perhaps to that. And it might just take time for innovative people to figure out ways to study it.
I couldn't agree more with everything you said. There was a lot of things you just said there that I totally agree with. For example, you talked about whether or not somebody would even recognize that there's a synchronicity happening. We just talked a little bit about how busy our social society has become. So they would have to kind of tune into that intuition and pay more attention. And then when you do pay attention, like you said, perhaps you would start to see more rainbows. I know my wife and I, we just traded in our Hyundai Tucson and got a Toyota 4Runner. And initially I had told her, I said, there's not really a whole lot of Toyota 4Runners in town. Well, now I'm seeing them everywhere. I've seen red ones, I've seen black ones, I've seen, different color ones. And it's interesting that you had mentioned that. So that would be, certainly a criticism that study would face. You'd have to kind of deal with that. You also hit on another important thing, even with psi, is creating that peaceful environment. So a lot of psi studies have shown that meditation helps open up psi. Certain altered states of consciousness have opened up psi. Being comfortable and having positive intentions. Certainly, belief plays a factor as well. Which somebody put to me one time. Of course, a skeptic is not going to experience this stuff because it goes against everything that they believe, which makes sense. That's why believers tend to experience the paranormal more than skeptics. But there was a lot that you said there that I totally agree with. In fact, even like you said, with the development of technology here in the future, I have been following Elon Musk's experiment there with the Neuralink gentleman, and he's able to control his computer with his thoughts now. And I don't think that it's far-fetched to think that in the future, if you're able to send brain signals to control your computer, if you had two people with Neuralink type chips, that you could possibly communicate mind to mind and have like an artificial telepathy happening. Because you're able to send those signals to control computers. So it would just be a matter of tweaking that technology so that you can send thoughts to that other person with that other neural chip. So, very, very fascinating. I think, like you said, in the future, once things get a little bit more advanced, I think we'll really start to see some development in these kind of areas for sure.
Well, and I also
No,
think,
go
just to
ahead.
pick up briefly on what you just said, I think that this aspect of like being calm and in sort of maybe an altered state or a meditative state being important for both synchronicity and psi is a really key point, because it's something that we even expect and have seen in other fields like sports, for example, or it's this idea, another aspect that I'm very interested in, of not trying so hard. So getting into psychological flow. So when an athlete, they can be a top athlete, and if they're trying too hard, if they're really focused on, okay, I have to go this way and then kick the ball this way, it's not going to work. Whereas when they're just in flow in the moment, that's when they often break records and do really amazing things. And so I think that many aspects of our lives operate in this way, and psi and synchronicity are no exception. It's that we need to kind of get into a space to more allow these factors to come through, as opposed to trying to force them to happen.
I totally agree with that too. I used to play hockey, and I found I would crumble when I knew that there was like scouts in in the stands. And I think it's exactly what you said. You're too focused on the intricate moves that you have to do on the ice, rather than just getting into your natural flow and just going out there and doing what you do best, which is very interesting. I know. I just talked about flow. Actually, I just finished taking a psychology and psy course from the Rhine, and we talked about the idea of flow. And there's been studies done where people are in that zone or that flow, whatever you want to call it, that uh, they'll ignore hunger, they'll ignore fatigue. If they're doing something like, there was one study done with an artist, for example. He was, hungry, he was tired, but he was just so lost in his creation that he was sacrificing all that to get it done. And when I started thinking about it, that's how I used to get when I would do homicide investigations. I'd go extended periods without sleep. There was a couple times I think I worked be nothing for me to work 80 hours in one work week, but I think there was like three homicides. I ended up working close to 130 hours in a week. So I mean, you're absolutely exhausted. You're not eating properly, but you've got that mindset that you're following leads and you're making progress, and you want to get results for the victim. So it's really interesting when you talk about entering that state of flow.
Mm.
With synchronicity, a lot of times symbols come up. What kind of symbols have you seen with some synchronistic events that people experience?
Hmm. Yeah, symbolism is like I brought up the rainbows earlier. Yeah, symbolism, of course, like Jung was really into symbolism as well, that anything, that basically this entire physical world is potentially symbolic of something deeper, something underneath.
We always
Um,
hear, like, when people pass away, they're like, "Oh, my grandmother really liked cardinals," and all of a sudden cardinals are showing up, and things like that. Would you consider those types of experiences to be possibly be synchronicity?
I love that you mentioned this, because it's a synchronicity happening in the moment. Because when my stepfather passed away, he passed away in 2007, very unexpectedly and very tragically. And when he passed away, cardinals started to appear for me. And of
Oh,
course,
that's funny.
I lived at the time in Canada, and so cardinals are fairly common, but they just really became present for me, and I really started to notice them. And even now, he passed away over a decade ago. I still get little hints and signs at key moments. A friend, on one of the anniversaries of his death, a friend of mine, she's like, "Oh, have you ever heard of this singer? She sings a song called Cardinal. It's a beautiful song." And she sent it to me, and it's actually about seeing cardinals after someone has passed away. And I was like, whoa. So yeah, so that's
Wow.
definitely, yeah, one symbol that has been very present for me. I have a cardinal on my desktop, a little photo of one for that reason. And another quick one that I'll give, that's maybe a little less obvious, but um, for a period of around 2 years, I had a series of synchronicities that happened with painted rocks. So rocks that people had painted little pictures on, that I was finding at really key moments. And the first two times that it happened, there was 4 or 5 times that it happened. And I don't know how common it is for people to find rocks with pictures on them painted around, but it happened to me 4 or 5 times. The first time it happened was during the pandemic, and it was one of these time periods where even outside we had to wear a mask, and I was walking around, and I had just gotten my first vaccine, and I didn't want to get vaccinated, and I was really upset about it. And um, but I was torn because I wanted to go to Canada to see my family because I was still living in Prague at the time, and it was the only way I could get there. And
Right.
so after the vaccination, I was upset, and like walking in a park crying into my mask. And then I looked over and there was this beautiful like rock that someone had painted this beautiful picture on. And I'd never seen one before. And I was like, oh, that's so beautiful. And I took it as like a form of comfort, but didn't think much of it. I didn't actually take it. I left it there. But um, and then I got one of these vaccines where you had to get a second one. And so the second vaccine, I was again upset, not wanting to do it. I went to a mall afterwards to get lunch, and I went up to the um, the little booth to pay for my lunch, and there was a little painted a rock there by the cash register with little sunshine, and it was like, in check, something like "Have a good day," or I'm like, oh, another painted rock on this exact moment. And then I found another one.
That's wild,
Yeah,
especially
yeah,
inside this time. Yeah.
inside a mall. Yeah. And then it happened again on my birthday on the top of a mountain in Austria on a bench. I went to sit on a bench to look out at this beautiful landscape, and there was this painted rock with a little beautiful picture on it. And then the last example I will give is that a few months later, my husband and I were really struggling over whether or not to buy this cabin in the woods we really wanted to buy. And we'd been declined a mortgage twice on it, and we were just like, oh, but we want it so badly. And we went for our final visit to this cabin. We're like, this is do or die. Like, we have to decide whether or not we're going to do this. And we were standing down at the water, and there's a little picnic table by the water. Um, and on that picnic table was a rock painted with a woman on it. And I was like, okay, we have to do this. It's because this cabin is very remote. Like, why someone would leave a rock with a little painting on it there, I have no idea why. And already I'd experienced enough of these synchronicities with rocks that I was like, okay, we were just going to do this. And we did, and it was the best decision we ever made. And we made it happen. And and I haven't seen Painted Rock since that one. But
Wow.
yeah, but in terms of symbols, I started looking up, and Jung actually talked about rocks as being symbolic of, I can't even remember what now, something about the self, about and the core of the self, is because rocks are a very grounded, very essential aspect of the earth. And, so anyone who experiences synchronicities with symbols, you can often Google, what Jung thought of a certain symbol, and often he's commented on it in some way.
That's really interesting. When you talked about the rocks with the painted images on it, I remember during COVID one day, I think I went to go put the garbage out at the end of my driveway, and there was a painted rock with like some sort of like happy image there as well. And I didn't take it either. I left it. I figured it was probably one of the kids in the neighborhood that were just trying to cheer people up because everyone was in lockdown, like you said, and they were kind of like dark times during the COVID era. But yeah, it was really interesting because it just came out of nowhere. Here it is sitting, on the end of my driveway, and like you said, it kind of did like make you stop and think, and you know, kind of improve your mood, I guess, at the time. So that's I find that really really fascinating, especially the different spots you were finding them in, like up on top of the mountain, up at the remote cabin, inside the store where you wouldn't expect to see, a rock. Very interesting. Do you guys still own the cabin?
Yes, yeah, yep.
Oh,
So
nice.
I've never seen another. This is our third summer there. I've never seen another painted rock there since. I left it there. Someone eventually took it, but yeah, like I said, it's a very remote place, and I don't know why someone would leave a rock on our picnic table. Like, it was our private little dock area that someone just happened to walk by and leave a rock there. So, and actually the picture of the woman on the rock looked very similar to a woman who ended up helping us financially in terms of securing the mortgage for the cabin. So it's just very interesting
There's
symbolically.
a lot of symbols in there, and yeah, very symbolic. That's really interesting. What's one way you think that if we were to pay more attention to synchronicity in our life, what are some advantages that synchronicity can bring to us in our day-to-day life?
Hmm. I think that it's it's multifaceted in the sense that, at least for me personally, and I think this might be the case for some listeners as well, when a synchronicity happens to me, it gives me a sense of meaning, that there's something more going on. And I don't necessarily mean something spiritual or God or religious, but that there's a deeper facet of reality that we perhaps aren't aware of with our modern scientific methods, that is operating, and that is intelligent, and that is co-creative, and that enjoys co-creating with us because it's a creative aspect of the universe. I think that the universe is inherently creative. I mean, evolution currently is just framed as being a bunch of accidents that led to cool things. But I think that if you look at it just slightly differently, you can see it as, evolution or the universe being the most creative artist ever, that is just constantly creating and creating. And so I think that when we start paying attention to these synchronicities, it gives us a sense that there's more and that we're being guided in some way. And then we can start to take comfort in some of that guidance. Some synchronicities that I've experienced have led to profound personal growth and development because I've ended up attending certain retreats, for example, because there were synchronicities that led me in the direction of certain personal development retreats. So I think that we can actually grow as a person when we start to pay attention to these synchronicities, because the impetus behind them is creativity and growth, whether it's for humans or for evolution, for plants, for the solar system, for the cosmos, whatever you might want to call it. And and just to say that I know it, many people will interpret what I'm saying as being God. And if that's, if God is the person giving you your synchronicities, if that's what you want to feel and believe, then that's fine. If you want to take it slightly differently, I usually tend to take it slightly differently because I find it doesn't put people off as much. If I put it in more, even physics types of terms, that there's perhaps a layer of reality that we don't quite understand yet, but that is operating and functioning. So I think that it just gives us little hints of that, and it makes life more fun. Sometimes when people, like skeptics, will say to me like, well, this is just a bunch of garbage. Why are you believing in this? Like, you're just deluding yourself. And I think, well, why not? I'm not hurting anybody. And it actually makes my life much more interesting. And like the story I just told you about the rocks, I don't know, that's just fun. And I could choose to just be like, oh, these random rocks were showing up because it was, yeah, like a trend during the pandemic and a lot of people were painting them. Um, the end. And like, well, what fun is that? My life is way more interesting when I perceive it in these type of ways. And as long as I'm not hurting anybody or becoming so delusional that I'm like completely out of touch with reality and I don't leave my house because I don't know, afraid of things. As long as my day-to-day functioning isn't being impacted in a negative way, then, why not?
Yeah, and you hit on a lot of like really practical implications there for synchronicity with the personal growth, providing insight, guidance, decision making. Yeah, I totally subscribe to that for sure. The other interesting thing as well, I find, like you said, instead of just like true skeptics, I like critical thinkers, like I would say you and I are both critical thinkers, but the true skeptics I don't like, because like you said, they just say, oh, that's all nonsense and it doesn't make, but I'm listening to what you're saying and I'm like, wow, like this is more than just a coincidence. Like this is, these are meaningful. They almost were meant to be discovered, by you at that time in your life, depending on what you're going through. And yeah, I find, I don't know, uh, I totally get it. And it's funny, we always like run into that resistance, but I'm glad that you're out there doing this type of work. What do you see for the future for you exploring synchronicity? Do you have any more papers that you want to work on? Is there any other research you're going to do? Is there anything else you're going to get into in parapsychology here in the future?
Hmm. Yeah, interesting question. I mean, first I'll just mention in relation to what you were just saying about skepticism is that the way that I like to think of it is I enjoy people who are informed skeptics. So they've actually read a study and then they critique it as opposed to just, and they critique it based on the actual study itself, the methodology, et cetera, as opposed to just saying, this is impossible, so it didn't happen, the end. So I would say that about skepticism. I think it's great to be a critical thinker, but you need to be an informed critical thinker. And in terms of what's next, I'm actually part of a synchronicity working group with a group called the Scientific and Medical Network. And we meet every 6 weeks or so. And it's a group of professors, academics, non-academics. It's a small group. So people can't just join. It's by invitation only, but we we meet to talk about synchronicity and about the research, about what we might want to do next. And it's a great combination of, there's people with backgrounds in psychology, there's physicists, there's neuroscientists, there's Jungian analysts. And we actually are putting out a book. It should be coming out later in the summer or perhaps in the fall on, I think it's called The Playful Universe. And then the subtitle has synchronicity in it somewhere, but it's a series of essays that many of us wrote on where we share a personal example of synchronicity, and then we answer the question, what kind of universe makes synchronicity possible? And we answer that from our various background, whether it's academic or spiritual background or physicist, whatever it might be. And so that's coming out. So that'll be, and then I think we're holding an online symposium sometime in the fall about that.
Oh,
So that's,
interesting.
yeah. So that's kind of the main thing that's on my radar, at least right now. And then I have a couple of master's students who just finished some research projects that are linked to one's based on work-related synchronicities, so synchronicities in your career. And the other is based on Rupert Sheldrake's theory of morphic resonance. And that student used Wordle to kind of test some ideas around Sheldrake's theory. So those I'll be working on as publications to come out over the next, hopefully, year or so. And then as for future empirical research, I'm open. I want to do studies. It's a matter of finding the time and the funds, et cetera. But I'll be supervising more master's students projects this coming academic year. And that's often where I end up doing my empirical work and hopefully publishing from as well.
That's interesting. So you have master students approaching you to do theses and research on synchronicity as well. Is that because of your background, or is that because of doing the transpersonal teaching at Alef?
It's a mixture. So at Alef Trust, we do propose, so supervisors propose potential topics, and then if a student is interested in that topic, they'll come and work with you. So it can go both ways. Either the student shows interest or they know I'm interested in it. In their third year of our master's program at Alef Trust, the student has to do a dissertation, a thesis. So if they're interested in it, then they can work with me, and then I'll often try to publish that research after they're finished.
Well, that's really fascinating. Have you helped any other master students write anything else to do with parapsychology? Any psi papers or anything?
No, none of them to do with psi or parapsychology, probably because the students themselves, they don't have the funding to do a proper experiment. Although actually, what came to me recently, and if you haven't heard of them, you might be interested in this. Uh, there's a group called Weird, like WYRD,
Yeah.
in in the UK, and they've inherited all of the equipment from the Princeton
Oh, no
pair.
way.
Yeah, they've
Yeah,
inherited all that
Princeton
equipment,
anomalies,
the research
Princeton
lab.
engineering anomalies research, yeah,
Yes.
laboratory.
So
Oh,
they
wow.
inherited that equipment. It's in the UK now, at this retreat center in the UK, and WYRD is, I think they're called like Go Weird or something like that. And they have engineers working with them that have developed interesting random number generator equipment, but that you can use. Like it's small and you can bring it around with you and test it in various ways. So I'm hoping to get some students who will be interested in doing some projects with them and also with me, like we would collaborate together. And that would be more within the actual sort of psi aspect. But so far that hasn't come to fruition, but I'm hoping that it will at some point in the future.
Wow, that's really cool. I hadn't heard a word. I'll have to check them out. It's really neat that they received the equipment from Pair. We often talk about here in Canada, there's really no like parapsychological laboratory up here in Canada. The late Dr. Michael Persinger, had developed the God helmet at Laurentian University. I guess that would have been like, kind of our closest Canadian parapsychological laboratory there until his passing. And then really it's the Rhine Research Center still has like the Gansfeld machine, and they do a lot of laboratory work there. But it's like you said, it's not readily available in academia, and I don't know if it's because, like we had talked about throughout the course of this episode, it just they don't fund it because it's so spontaneous. It's hard to replicate. Doesn't necessarily happen in a laboratory. It happens, in your own home or outside or just randomly. But I mean, that's the nature of this type of phenomena. If we totally understood it, it wouldn't really be considered the paranormal. It would just be considered the normal.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I
Exactly.
know even for investigations, just last year, I was doing like a public ghost hunt for Esterfest up in Amherst, which is home to the poltergeist case there, Esther Cox, or the Great Amherst Mystery. And the night before at the museum, there was a paranormal team that was investigating just privately, just them. And the curator of the museum had said that this old rotary phone that was on the wall had rung by itself, and it's of course not operational; it's not plugged in. And so I said, "Oh my god!" I said, "That's amazing. Did they, get any evidence of it?" And they said, "No, like they weren't in the room at the time. We just heard it, and we went, and there was nobody near it. No one touched it." And I got the idea. I said, geez, I said, the paranormal is so spontaneous that things can happen at any time. So, what I did for my nonprofit organization, Paranormal Phenomena Research Investigations, I bought 4 or 5 police body worn cameras that we now wear during our investigations in case something like that happens. So, in that particular instance, nobody was in the room, but at least you would have heard the ringing come up on the audio and at least had some sort of, evidence like that. But that's how tricky the paranormal can be. You almost have to outsmart it or think outside the box. The
Yeah.
camera actually, so far, they've come in handy once. I was just at the Fortress of Lewisburg a couple of weekends ago filming with a TV series, Maritime Haunting. And we were in the jail and there was no activity happening at all. There was no electricity in there, so of course you weren't getting any EMF readings. It was completely quiet, very calm feeling. So we decided to kind of energize the environment a little bit. I started playing some French military marching music, and the weird thing that happened is it was supposed to be a 3 minute and 50-second clip from YouTube, and about 30 seconds in, it just stopped. And myself and the other investigator looked at each other and we said, "Oh, that's weird." I went over and I picked my phone up, and the screen hadn't locked. I didn't touch any buttons. I literally just picked it up, and all of a sudden, the music started playing again. And for whatever reason, like it had stopped for that entire time. And of course, it got caught on the body camera, which I was happy that we had it. So just kind of very strange things like that. So you always got to think outside the box when you're investigating this type of phenomena. So I'll be interested to see, yeah, see your future work. And obviously, I follow you on social media. How can people get in touch with you or follow your work? I know you're on LinkedIn, and I know you have a website. It's bethanybutzer.com.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So the website is one way. I'm on Facebook. My Facebook is just my name with the PhD after it. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. My name is fairly unique. So if people look me up, they can find me on those social channels fairly easily. So yeah, and I post about my research and a variety of other things on social media as well.
Well, that's phenomenal. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today about synchronicity. It was very interesting. I certainly enjoyed listening to some of your experiences, and um yeah, it was very very fascinating topic. Like I said, it comes up in the paranormal, especially related to quite a bit. So yeah, I'm glad that there's people such as yourself that are willing to take that academic risk and look into it further.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me. I always appreciate an opportunity to chat about these topics, and I love it when synchronicities happen live on the show too. So it's always a nice example of how these types of phenomena can work in real life. So yeah, thanks for having me.
No problem. Yeah, it was really cool with the cardinal thing and just a few different like very similar incidences. Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. I totally believe that there's something out there kind of giving us that information, like you said, whether it's a spiritual being, whether it's the universe energy itself. There's I think there's more than meets the eye when it comes to synchronicity and coincidences.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks again.
No problem. Take care.
Yeah, you as well. Bye-bye.